Leave meeting. Nah.
Welcome back, guys, to the honest. What am I saying? I messed up the whole intro. Welcome back
He's not even honest anyway, guys.
Well, I guess, yeah, if you've listened to Rob's part one, you'll get that joke. So welcome back to the Pastor Podcast. I'm Michael. This is coffee drinker over here.
Yeah, I'm Rob.
Yeah,
welcome.
So if you are just on this episode, you've missed the whole month. So you probably just need to stop and go back and listen to all of this stuff up to this point. But in case you just want to start here, that's a weird place to start, but cool. We have been talking about a little about our personal stories of kind of questioning the faith, what that looks like, because deconstruction's a thing. I think everybody goes through it to a point. So if you're up to this point, you've heard my part one, Rob's part one, my part two, and we're going to end here with kind of Rob's the part two of his story of questioning everything. So where did we leave you last time, in case people are kind of just catching up right now?
Well, there was a whole lot of cliffhanging happening, right? I mean, I mentioned certainly the major event, I think, or major group of events, rather, that kind of brought me to that crisis moment when I didn't consciously think this, but I certainly was at a place where I thought, as I look back, I realized I need to either know this and believe this or just not. And to your point, I think that there are some, like what you said a few moments ago, I wonder if there aren't some folks who have maybe some of those and ignore them. Because so we were talking about one of those specific stories, no names mentioned, mm-hmm. And like some of the very people who to me were like the most, because I was in their life more, I saw lots of hypocrisy and stuff like that. And it was really blatant hypocrisy that a teenager could pick up on, that it didn't make sense, Mm-hmm. So it just makes me wonder, like on the back end, are there folks who, I mean, do they have to think this stuff? And then I don't understand that, because like, I guess I couldn't have done that. Like I couldn't, I don't know, do the whole thing for that long without going, why am I doing this?
You're not just following along to follow along. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, so that happened. And if you don't know what I mean by that happened, go listen to the other episode. Yeah. And then my dishonest, good-hearted friend, Michael here.
True, apparently. Yeah.
No, I mean, there was the introduction to guys like Mark Driscoll and others who, I mean, at the time, God used them to yell at me in the right ways. And I heard a whole different side of theology that I didn't even know existed, really. That would have sort of been the opposite of what we heard growing up. And so that alone kind of set in motion this, okay, well, let's hear this then. Like it set in motion that there is more actually out there to be learned, so that I can come to a conclusion other than this is bogus, right? And so I don't know, it was another year or two of a process of me, I think, working through some of that. Ironically, during the last bit of that, I was actually a paid youth pastor as I was walking through, like my life was cleaned up, but I was certainly still walking through this what does it all mean kind of stuff, which is in retrospect not a good, you're probably not the guy to lead youth who are going to at the same time be dealing with this. So for you honest youth pastor folks, there's a tip. If you're questioning scripture regularly and trying to cipher through it, probably don't be a youth pastor yet. But so then that worked itself out to the point that I became what I mean, if you've listened to this very much at all, you know that like I lean reformed in theology at this point. I would say Calvinist, but I kind of am at the point that I kind of feel like it's just biblical. but I'm not going to be judgy about it either way. But there comes those points, like with Haley being born in life, when okay, now I know how this works out on paper. I have answers for things, but this is happening, and now I'm going to find out if I believe it, kind of thing, right? So for me, part of that was Afghanistan. When I went to Afghanistan in 2009, that was a really defining time in that way. And man, then after there was a time that I began to deal with Afghanistan, which was a totally different time frame. And that, so, and it's not just that, like I have one of our sons is our youngest son is 10 now, so getting old and stuff, but he is one eye is gone, and that's because when he was 2 months old, he had tons and tons and tons of problems with that eye, and part of it was fancy words. I'm going to sound really smart for a second. Okay,
go for it.
So part of it was that there was calcification on the back of his eye, and that usually means cancer. So they were thinking retinoblastoma, just the type of eye cancer. So within just a 2-week period, we were at the Dakota Eye Institute in Bismarck, North Dakota, then the Amplatz Children's Hospital in Minneapolis, Minnesota, twice, and they didn't want to touch it because if it was cancer, it's, I mean, obviously close to his brain. And so anyway, they sent us all the way to this place in Philadelphia. So it was just this crazy time, right? In just a couple of weeks. And on top of that, another thing that might sound trivial, but if you're supporting a family, it's not. I had just started a new job, and so I wasn't insured yet, right? So even financially, on the back end of this, it's like, oh my gosh, like there's no way that it was a very stressful time all around. But now we have a youngster now. He's 10 years old. He's healthy. He's got one eye, and he's got more fight in him than most adults I know. But those are moments like your time with Haley that you talked about, and I think others, there's the time that something happens, you begin to question, so you find out the information, and then there's the time that something happens and you have to test whether you believe the information that you now know. And so there have been several of those since then. And the guys that I listen to have all changed. The books that I read have all changed. The lenses through which I look at scripture are different now. And I think I'm by no means a professional apologist, faith defender kind of a guy, but I definitely think that coming through those things has given me now the ability to, whenever something comes up, to go, okay, what are you up to here? Instead of, okay, what the heck, are you even there? Right? Mm-hmm. So like that posture has changed now in me. And one of the times that I recognized that happened was some years ago now, because Wyatt was just a baby yet, not even 2, I don't think, and Donna was pregnant, and we had a miscarriage, right? And she was far enough along into her pregnancy that we had kind of a little makeshift funeral and that kind of stuff. So that was really, hard, right? But where I knew, and that it certainly wasn't a bragging thing, but it was more like a, wow, God, I had no idea that I had been brought here kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. Part of my reaction to that was not only, well, God is bigger than this really hurts, but like, not only was my trust in him, but I was also thinking, okay, how do I respond in a way that is going to make him look bigger and more amazing, right? And that's a really defining thing for me, to be in this moment of tragedy, right? Like, Haley and Christina made it through, right? Wyatt is alive and well. I just talked to him, and he was, maybe getting in trouble at this point. I don't know. That's another story. But this didn't end well, mm-hmm. right? Like this was the death of what was going to be our child, right? And so I remember, it's ironic that I'm standing at my in-laws, where I'm at this for a few days this week, because probably 150 yards from here is where that child is buried. And I remember standing around being the grieving dad, and having my Bible open, with a few family members, some of which I'm not sure are believers at all. Mm-hmm. And reading scripture and praying. And so I went from a guy who, I think the whole journey, when you look at it from the big picture, it's just insane that God brought me from this guy who saw that things aren't always what they look like they are. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to go get some vodka, right? To then, some years later, being the guy who, in the midst of that tragedy, is acting in such a way that other people are going, why are you not angry or whatever, Mm-hmm. So it was really a full circle kind of a thing. Now, I think something that sometimes gets overlooked, and you can jump in here too, is that those moments are not going to end, right? Yeah. Like, there are still going to be times that this happens or that happens, and it really rocks me in some way. It doesn't have to be some kind of major tragedy in my own life. I'm a pastor now. Like, tragedy happens all the time, So I'm probably going to be praying with the guy later this afternoon. We're going to head back, and the elders and I are supposed to meet with a gentleman who's been struggling with demonization, which is like, there are always things that are happening that make you go, okay, God, I think that the difference is, at this point in my life, the answer isn't how could you let this happen. The answer is, what does your word say about this, and how should I respond, right? So
no, I
don't
think
know.
yeah, no, I think that's helpful in the sense that I think too, so this being the last episode is kind of having to wrap everything and pile everything back into the back end of this. But one, I think through these episodes, what we've seen is that obviously there are going to be these big moments for people. Big moments that you maybe in some respects you don't even realize are the big moments until you're past it, like the moment you mentioned for example in the basement where the Bible was popped open, like that you probably would have pinpointed that as this is the moment that everything starts falling apart, but that was the moment that it wasn't some colossal thing, it was just that. And I think we all everyone's going to have those moments, so it's just a matter of understanding okay, like you said, where you're at now, or where you were at, where in the point of that miscarriage happening, you were able to look back and say, wow, look where I've come from. Or like, for example, now I can look back and be like, wow, look where I am compared to 14, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we have to realize, so when I'm looking at friends that are deconstructing or friends that are going through those questions, we have to understand that like they're in the middle of that maybe. And though we want to rush to answer those questions really fast, maybe it's, and this is just me like honestly thinking through the process right now, but maybe it's best to just think back and be like, okay, I was there at one point. What would have been the most helpful thing for me then? And maybe that is just, being that person there for them. Maybe that is just, just sitting down and hanging out with them and, just letting them know you're there. Right. So what I've found, not only in myself, but in other people, is that whenever people start having like those situations, right? So whenever you see hypocrisy and you want to run away, or whenever the questions of, the canon come up for me, right? I think what we want to do, like our natural desire is to jump in and try to fix that, right? Because we don't want somebody to run away from the faith, when actually our jumping in to try to answer and fix that maybe is not the best beneficial thing in that moment for them. Maybe, and I think this is where maybe the modern day equivalent of, what we see as church versus what we see as church in the Bible are a bit different, right? It's more of a community of walking together in this than it is that I have all the answers, let me fix all the questions now for you. Because that wouldn't have been helpful for me. In a number of points in my life, the two that I mentioned specifically in college or when Haley, was being born, not super helpful. If somebody's just jumping in and trying to solve it all right there and give me all the answers on a silver platter, rather than just walk. I can think of somebody specifically that was at Haley's birth and again, it wasn't like a pastor that was trying to jump in and answer, but it was this person just trying to give definite stuff. And I was just like, I want to throw you out of this hospital window. If you could just shut up and just be here, that would be more helpful to me. And I think that's, as we talk about, questioning faith, if we want to label it deconstruction, let's label it that, because that seems to be the big thing. But as we see people going through that, I think what's been helpful for me is to step back and be like, all right, all of these people are in different processes, part of that process for them. And like you said, like when you started, like people just wrote you off. And I think we see a lot of that whenever, if you want to look at like the mainstream, right? Whenever a worship pastor, or whenever an author, or whenever a prominent Christian name's like, well, I don't believe in Christianity anymore. Okay, yeah, you don't have a clue what a decade looks like for them from now. But how you react to them in that instance does affect them. Your story, I think, is a perfect example of that. Writing somebody off automatically, not incredibly helpful in those moments. Yeah. And I think the pieces that are written, or the videos that are done, or the comments that are put on some of these people's social medias when they come out, are not the most helpful in that situation that they could be. But because of how social media is, and because of how we want to be, like we want to be there and answer the questions and give all of this, sometimes maybe we're doing more harm than good, perhaps, in our response.
Well, and I think discernment is so overlooked when it comes to things like that, because so I'm walking with a young man right now who, I mean, isn't questioning his faith, but is walking through something hard. And sometimes he says things or asks questions that aren't actually the questions he's asking or wrestling with. Like there's something else. There's a reason happening why he asked this question, that actually that's the thing that needs to be addressed. And so I think sometimes when we do a lot of rushing into situations, and whether it's out of panic or, oh no, you can't, no, we can't do this, you can't think that, or whatever, I don't know what it is, but no matter the reason, sometimes when we rush in and try to do that, you end up answering questions that maybe they only have on the surface, but it's not the point. It's not what they're actually dealing with and walking through. So I think just like obviously the best answer in my mind is twofold, right? The parents in the world, when you have conversations about catechism, if whether it's formal or not, I think it would have done me a lot of good as a kid to hear regularly adults confess their sin. That would have taken that hypocrisy thing and burned it at the stake. You know what I mean? Because okay, I can recognize you just like me. We all screw up, right? So like I think there are some things like that just living authentically out loud, not trying to put a face on for this person or that person, or for your church even, or for whatever. I had a really, really hard sermon this past week to preach because it was harsh. and yet, I'm always quick to say, I'm talking to me too, things like that. Like, I've just had to deal with this past week, and you're going to have to this coming week, because it's super important that they know that I'm like not some untouchable, or that I'm not, it's not a secret that I'm not, but that I'm not pretending to be or trying to come off like some untouchable, incorruptible person just because of a title I have, right? Like I'm just as screwed up as you. I just get paid to know things and read, and you know what I mean? Like, so I think having authenticity would go a long way in today's day and age. And I think on top of that, like you talked about us jumping and rushing to try and fix things. One of the things that you hear a lot in the social justice world, or any hot topic among young people, essentially, is the word conversation, right? Like, let's just have a conversation about it. And I think that there's a sense in which we need to allow for that, not that we need to have a conversation in the sense that I'm open to you convincing me of something necessarily, but I certainly need to hear exactly where you're coming from before I can have any sort of valid way to answer you anyway. Right? Like I might have the answer. I might not, but even if I tell you the answer, I might not be able to tell you the answer in a way that's going to make any difference at all, unless I hear exactly where you're standing and where you're coming from and where the hurt is, or whatever that looks like, So yeah, I don't know if that helps, or if that's something that you've noticed as well, or I don't know.
Sure.
But
yeah, and so that was kind of the hope of these episodes, was to give you guys that are watching or listening like an example of like, all right, so this isn't super clean and like it's messy. It's a messy process, and it takes a while.
Yeah.
I mean, the things we've went through in part 1 and part 2 of our perspective or separate episodes. I mean, we're talking about 30 years or maybe 20 years there within that process of things that are working out, and the different kind of high points in that time frame. And I think oftentimes, at least, I mean, again, I can only speak for me, but I think sometimes like we, as believers, we only see that moment and we really start freaking out about that moment when, again, if we really trust that God is in control of all things, he is sufficient, he is an authority, then like, okay, all we're seeing is that moment. That's not the end of the story. That's not the whole thing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be done either that can be helpful in that moment that we can do, or it can be actually incredibly not beneficial in that moment, even if it's coming from a heart of trying to be helpful. So for me, just looking at both of our stories and looking at the people that, that I've seen that I would say have come out maybe on, they've walked away from the faith, it's very perspective wise for me to go, okay, well, that's this moment. And they may not come back to Christ. They may continue, the path they're working on, or, God, this could be part of God's plan for them to where he'll just drop somebody. I pray for that often for a lot of people, that he'll just drop somebody that I'm totally unaware of in front of them that they have to deal with because it's separate from everything they've known before. And he'll use that person to speak to them in a way that only he can do that to. So I think, as we talk about deconstruction and people losing their faith or working through their faith, that's an important thing to remember, that like, one, we all do that at some level. And two, the moment you see right now isn't the final moment. Like it's just part of it. So, and then keeping those two things in perspective, I think is helpful as well. Like you said, you're not going to be able to respond to somebody in an appropriate way. And I think that's really wise until you hear like how they're processing it. I mean, you can think that you know the answer to the question, but until you know what they're thinking, you don't really know. So I think those are both helpful. And I think that's representative in what we've talked about through these different parts, that this is a thing that happens and it's going to happen. And in a lot of cases it should. I'm glad that I don't hold the same theology I did when I was 10. That would be not so great to hold on.
Well, and I think we're talking about, so two quick things. And then I think I can't think of anything else, but, one, I think what we call deconstruction has been called something for a long time, and really all that it is we're wrestling, those that grow up in the church or a part of the church or whatever, that have something to deconstruct. All that's happening is the faith that you've inherited from your parents now has to become your own. Right. I mean, that's really what it is. At the end of the day, that's what it is. And so what we found out is either the faith that you've inherited from your parents was actually real in you, and you're going to struggle through it, and it's probably going to be super ugly. It's not necessarily going to be this tiny little thing, right? You might have some Abraham Piper days, right? But then ultimately that faith becomes yours, and now you have it's not just I go to church because mom and daddy did, right? Or I'm Baptist because they were, or I'm Catholic because that's where I was, you know what I mean? Like it's no longer stuff that you grew up with, it's stuff that you believe wholeheartedly because of your own life and your own experiences, your own study and all of that. And two, I think that it's super helpful to hear some stories, not that ours are amazing in particular, but to hear stories that have ended well, because all you hear about today are these deconstruction stories that, oh, well, I'm an atheist now or whatever, and like that's how it seemingly has ended, right? But everybody, like you said, everybody who's been raised in the church has to do this. For my faith to not be mom's anymore, but to be mine, I have to go through this process. Mm-hmm. Everybody has a different level of ugly that is, but but everybody does it. So essentially everyone who's still a Christian and they're in their 60s has been there and come out on the other side of it. You know what I mean? So.
Oh yeah. And just the importance of telling that story and not assuming that it's going to be easy for everyone, and actually being, and again, ironically, it goes back to what we see in scripture, just being honest about the fact that, like, okay, this wasn't easy for me. Like, there is a wrestle here. So yeah, and just telling your story.
So you have to Sean McDowell is one of, I know you know who that is, one of the leading apologists of our time, right? His dad was also one of the leading apologists of the generation prior. And Sean McDowell tells the story of him actually working through this, right? And there was a time that he went to his dad, who, again, is this big name apologist who is a defender of the faith. Everybody knows who Josh McDowell is, right? And he goes to his dad as a teenager at some point in his teenage years and says, I'm not sure that I believe this. And his dad's response was epic. It was just like, good. And he just kind of encouraged him to study it, look it up, look at all the evidence, look at this and that, So I'm gonna exit with raise your kids like Eminem. So there's a point, if you've ever seen the movie 8 Mile. If you have not, I'm not going to recommend it because it's a terrible movie. It's unbiblical in every way. But there's a point at the end of that movie where he's in this epic rap battle, right, to get all of his street cred or whatever you get with that, right? And he goes first, right, so that the other guy has a chance to respond and make him look really stupid, right? So he goes first, but the whole first 2/3 of his little piece of that rap battle is saying all the stupid things about him that the other guy could possibly say, right? Gotcha. So when the guy comes up, he's got nothing left to say. He has no argument, nothing to make fun of him about, because he's done it to himself. Yeah. And I think that idea, that concept, is actually important for us as parents or youth pastors or whatever, wherever you're at. It's important to be okay to say, look, at some point, kids, your faith is going to not have to be like, you're going to have to do your own study. You're going to have to come to your own conclusions about Christ. It's important for dads to say, I really screwed up. I'm sorry. And I'm just like you. I need Christ's forgiveness all the time, and I mess up. There's things I have to work on. It's important for us to say all of these things before the world tells them about these things, because the world is coming from a different perspective and a different worldview. Mm-hmm. And so it's important that they hear it from us rather than being surprised by it someday. And
you can't end a podcast better than with an Eminem reference. So thank you for listening to the worst podcast you'll ever listen to with your balding host and, whatever he wants to say about himself. We'll talk to you next month. See ya.
Later.